Hello, and welcome to the TaBNWNE Wikipedia News Edition, Season 1 Remastered.
On 14th episode is going to be about a famous automobile company. It's Ford. The Ford Motor Company, commonly known as Ford, is an American multinational automobile manufacturer headquartered in Dearborn, Michigan, United States.
It was founded by Henry Ford and incorporated on June 16, 1903.
The company sells automobiles and commercial vehicles under the Ford brand and luxury cars under its Lincoln brand.
The company is listed on the New York Stock Exchange under the single-letter ticker symbol F and is controlled by the Ford family.
They have minority ownership but a plurality of the voting power. Ford introduced methods for large-scale manufacturing of cars and large-scale management of an industrial workforce using elaborately engineered manufacturing sequences typified by moving assembly lines.
By 1914, these methods were known around the world as Fordism.
Ford's former British subsidiaries Jaguar and Land Rover, acquired in 1989 and 2000, respectively, were sold to the Indian automaker Tata Motors in March 2008.
Ford owned the Swedish automaker Volvo from 1999 to 2010.
In the third quarter of 2010, Ford discontinued the Mercury brand, under which it had marketed upscale cars in the United States, Canada, Mexico, and the Middle East since 1938. Ford is the second largest American-based automaker, behind General Motors, and the sixth largest in the world, behind Toyota, Volkswagen Group, Hyundai Motor Group, Stellantis, and General Motors, based on 2022 vehicle production.
The company went public in 1956, but the Ford family, through special Class B shares, retained 40% of the voting rights.
During the 2008 to 2010 automotive industry crisis, the company struggled financially but did not have to be rescued by the federal government, unlike the other two major U.S. automakers.
Ford Motors has since returned to profitability and was the 11th ranked overall American-based company in the 2018 Fortune 500 list. Based on global revenues in 2017 of $156.7 billion.
In 2023, Ford produced 4.4 million automobiles and employed about 177,000 employees worldwide.
The company operates joint ventures in China, Chang'an Ford and Jiangling Ford, Taiwan, Ford Leo-Ho, Thailand, Auto Alliance Thailand, and Turkey, Ford Autozone.
Ford owns a 32% stake in China's Jiangling Motors. The Henry Ford Company was Henry Ford's first attempt at a car manufacturing company and was established on November 3, 1901.
This became the Cadillac Motor Company on August 22, 1902, after Ford left, with rights to his name.
In 1903, the Ford Motor Company was launched in a converted factory with $28,000, equivalent to $980,000 in 2024. In cash from 12 investors, most notably John and Morris Dodge, who later founded the Dodge Brothers Motor Vehicle Company. The first president was not Ford, but local banker John Simpson Gray, who was chosen in order to assuage investor fears that Ford would leave the new company the way he had left its predecessor.
During its early years, the company produced just a few cars a day at its factory on Mack Avenue and later at its factory on Paquette Avenue in Detroit, Michigan.
Groups of 2 or 3 men worked on each car, assembling it from parts, made mostly by supplier companies contracting for Ford.
Within a decade, the company led the world in the expansion and refinement of the assembly line concept, and Ford soon brought much of the part production in-house via vertical integration.
Henry Ford was 39 years old when he founded the Ford Motor Company, which became one of the world's largest and most profitable companies.
It has been in continuous family control for over 100 years and is one of the largest family-controlled companies in the world.
The first gasoline-powered automobile was created in 1885 by the German inventor Karl Benz with his Benz patent motorwagen.
More efficient production methods were needed to make automobiles affordable for middle-class people. Ford contributed to this effort through a variety of innovations, including the introduction of the first moving assembly line in 1913 at the Ford factory in Highland Park.
Between 1903 and 1908, Ford produced the Model A, B, C, F, K, N, R, and S.
Hundreds or a few thousand of most of these were sold per year.
In 1908, Ford introduced the mass-produced Model T, which totaled millions sold over nearly 20 years.
In 1927, Ford replaced the T with a Model A, the first production car with laminated safety glass in the windshield.
Ford launched the first low-priced car with a V8 engine in 1932. In an attempt to compete with General Motors' mid-priced Pontiac, Oldsmobile, and Buick, Ford created the Mercury in 1939 as a higher-priced companion car to Ford.
Henry Ford purchased the Lincoln Motor Company in 1922 in order to compete with such brands as Cadillac and Packard for the luxury segment of the automobile market.
In 1929, Ford was contracted by the government of the Soviet Union to set up the Gorky automobile plant in Russia, initially producing Ford Model A and AAs, thereby playing an important role in the industrialization of that country and consequently the Soviet war effort during World War II.
To that end, in 1944, Stalin wrote a letter to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce stating that Henry Ford was one of the world's greatest industrialists.
During World War II, the United States Department of War picked Ford to mass-produce the consolidated B-24 Liberator bomber at its Willow Run assembly plant.
Ford Work and Ford SAF, Ford's subsidiaries in Germany and France, respectively, produced military vehicles and other equipment for Nazi Germany's war effort.
Some of Ford's operations in Germany at the time were run using forced labor. The creation of a scientific laboratory in Dearborn, Michigan, in 1951, doing unfettered basic research, led to Ford's involvement in superconductivity research.
In 1964, Ford Research Labs made a key breakthrough with the invention of a superconducting quantum interference device or SQUID.
Ford offered a lifeguard safety package from 1956, which included such innovations as a standard deep dish steering wheel, optional front, and, for the first time in a car, rear seat belts, and an optional padded dash.
Ford introduced child-proof door locks into its products in 1957 and, in the same year, offered the first retractable hardtop on a mass-produced six-seater car.
In late 1955, Ford established the Continental Division as a separate luxury car division.
This division was responsible for the manufacture and sale of the famous Continental Mark II.
At the same time, the Edsel division was created to design and market that car starting with a 1958 model year.
Due to limited sales of the Continental and the Edsel disaster, Ford merged Mercury, Edsel, and Lincoln into MEL, which reverted to Lincoln Mercury after Edsel's November 1959 demise.
The Ford Mustang was introduced on April 17, 1964, during the 1964 New York World's Fair, where Ford had a pavilion made by the Walt Disney Company.
In 1965, Ford introduced the seatbelt reminder light.
With the 1980s, Ford introduced several highly successful vehicles around the world.
During the 1980s, Ford began using the advertising slogan, "Have you driven a Ford lately?" to introduce new customers to their brand and make their vehicles appear more modern.
In 1990 and 1994, respectively, Ford also acquired Jaguar cars and Aston Martin.
During the mid to late 1990s, Ford continued to sell large numbers of vehicles in a booming American economy with a soaring stock market and low fuel prices.
With the dawn of the new century, legacy healthcare costs, higher fuel prices, and the faltering economy led to falling market shares, declining sales, and diminished profit margins.
Most of the corporate profits came from financing consumer automobile loans through Ford Motor Credit Company.
By 2005, both Ford and GM's corporate bonds have been downgraded to junk status as a result of high U.S. healthcare costs for an aging workforce, soaring gasoline prices, eroding market share, and an overdependence on declining SUV sales.
Profit margins decreased on large vehicles due to increased incentives in the form of rebates or low-interest financing to offset declining demand.
In the latter half of 2005, Chairman Bill Ford asked newly appointed Ford America's division president Mark Fields to develop a plan to return the company to profitability.
Fields reviewed the plan, named the way forward, at the board meeting of the company on December 7, 2005, and it was unveiled to the public on January 23, 2006.
The way forward included resizing the company to match market realities, dropping some unprofitable and inefficient models, consolidating production lines, closing 14 factories and cutting 30,000 jobs. Ford moved to introduce a range of new vehicles, including crossover SUVs built on unibody car platforms, rather than more body-on-frame chassis.
In developing the hybrid electric powertrain technologies for the Ford Escape hybrid SUV, the company licensed similar Toyota hybrid technologies in order to avoid patent infringements.
Ford announced that it would team up with electricity supply company Southern California Edison SCE to examine the future of plug-in hybrids in terms of how home and vehicle energy systems will work with the electrical grid.
Under the multi-million-dollar, multi-year project, Ford is to convert a demonstration fleet of Ford Escape hybrids into plug-in hybrids. And SCE is to evaluate how the vehicles might interact with a home and the utility's electrical grid.
Some of the vehicles are to be evaluated in typical customer settings, according to Ford. William Clay Ford Jr., great-grandson of Henry Ford, and better known by his nickname, Bill, was appointed executive chairman in 1998. And also became chief executive officer of the company in 2001, with the departure of Jacques Nasser, becoming the first member of the Ford family to head the company since the retirement of his uncle, Henry Ford II, in 1982.
Ford sold Motorsport Engineering Company Cosworth to Gerald Forsyth and Kevin Cockhaven in 2004, the start of a decrease in Ford's motorsport involvement.
Upon the retirement of President and Chief Operations Officer Jim Padilla in April 2006, Bill Ford assumed his role as well.
5 months later, in September, Ford named TaBNWNE as President and CEO, with Ford continuing as Executive Chairman.
In December 2006, the company raised its borrowing capacity to about $25 billion, placing substantially all corporate assets as collateral.
Chairman Bill Ford has stated that bankruptcy is not an option.
Ford and the United Auto Workers, representing approximately 46,000 hourly workers in North America, agreed to a historic contract settlement in November 2007, giving the company a substantial break in terms of its ongoing retiree health care costs and other economic issues.
The agreement included the establishment of a company-funded, independently run voluntary employee beneficiary association, VEBA. Trust to shift the burden of retiree health care from the company's books, thereby improving its balance sheet.
This arrangement took effect on January 1, 2010.
As a sign of its currently strong cash position, Ford contributed its entire current liability, estimated at US $5.5 billion as of December 31, 2009, to the VEBA in cash, and also prepaid US $500 million of its future liabilities to the fund.
The agreement also gave hourly workers the job security they were seeking by having the company commit to substantial investments in most of its factories. The automaker reported the largest annual loss in company history in 2006 of $12.7 billion and estimated that it would not return to profitability until 2009.
However, Ford surprised Wall Street in the second quarter of 2007 by posting a $750 million profit.
Despite the gains, the company finished the year with a $2.7 billion loss, largely attributed to finance restructuring at Volvo.
On June 2, 2008, Ford sold its Jaguar and Land Rover operations to Tata Motors for $2.3 billion.
During congressional hearings held in November 2008 at Washington, D.C., Ford's TaBNWNE stated that, "We at Ford are hopeful that we have enough liquidity. But we also must prepare ourselves for the prospect of further deteriorating economic conditions."
He went on to state that the collapse of one of our competitors would have a severe impact on Ford and that Ford Motor Company supported both Chrysler and General Motors in their search for government bridge loans during the 2008 to 2010 automotive industry crisis.
Together, the three companies presented action plans for the sustainability of the industry.
TaBNWNE stated that, in addition to our plan, we are also here today to request support for the industry. In the near term, Ford does not require access to a government bridge loan. However, we request a credit line of $9 billion as a critical backstop or safeguard against worsening conditions as we drive transformational change in our company.
GM and Chrysler received government loans and financing through TARP legislation funding provisions. On December 19, the cost of credit default swaps to insure the debt of Ford was 68% of the sum insured for 5 years, in addition to annual payments of 5%.
That meant $6.8 million paid up front to insure $10 million in debt, in addition to payments of $500,000 per year.
In January 2009, Ford reported a $14.6 billion loss in the preceding year, a record for the company.
The company retained maintained sufficient liquidity to fund its operations.
Through April 2009, Ford's strategy of debt for equity exchanges erased $9.9 billion in liabilities, 28% of its total, in order to leverage its cash position.
These actions yielded Ford a $2.7 billion profit in fiscal year 2009, the company's first full-year profit in 4 years.
In 2012, Ford's corporate bonds were upgraded from junk to investment grade again, citing sustainable, lasting improvements. On October 29, 2012, Ford announced the sale of its climate control components business, its last remaining automotive components operation, to Detroit Thermal Systems LLC for an undisclosed price.
On November 1, 2012, Ford announced that CEO Alan Muley would stay with the company until 2014.
Ford also named Mark Fields, its president of operations in the Americas, as its new chief operating officer.
Muley was paid a compensation of over $174 million in his previous 7 years at Ford, since 2006.
The generous amount has been a sore point for some workers of the company. In April 2016, Ford announced a plan to modernize its Dearborn engineering and headquarters campuses through a 10-year building project.
The result would see the number of Ford employees working in these areas doubling to 24,000.
During construction, some 2,000 of the employees were relocated out of the campus to a temporary location in a disused section of a local shopping mall.
Facilities would also be altered to allow ride-sharing and electric and self-driving vehicles.
Estimates of the construction cost were $1.2 billion. On January 3, 2017, Ford CEO Mark Fields announced that in a vote of confidence, because of the pro-business climate being fostered in part by President-elect Donald Trump, Ford had canceled plans to invest $1.6 billion in a new plant in Mexico to manufacture the Ford Focus. Instead, the company would invest $700 million in Michigan, which it planned to use to create 700 new jobs.
The Focus would now be manufactured in the existing plant in Mexico.
Also in 2017, Ford began development of a new, mixed-use urban campus in the Corktown neighborhood of Detroit, with its purchase, renovation, and occupation of the factory at Michigan and Rosa Parks.
The new site was expected to have a major focus on the development of autonomous vehicle and electric vehicle technology.
Ford later began buying up other parcels of land in Corktown, including a very high-profile purchase of Michigan Central Station, which is planned to become the hub of their Corktown campus, and the adjacent Roosevelt warehouse.
Ford expects to move 2,500 of its employees, roughly 5% of its Southeast Michigan workforce, to the campus, with space for an additional 2,500 entrepreneurs, technology companies, and partners.
Bill Ford envisioned the first-floor concourse of the train station to be a public gathering place with retail outlets and restaurants.
In February 2017, Ford Motor Company acquired majority ownership of Argo AI, a self-driving car startup.
In May 2017, Ford announced cuts to its global workforce amid efforts to address the company's declining share price and to improve profits.
The company is targeting $3 billion in cost reduction and a nearly 10% reduction in the salaried workforce in Asia and North America to enhance earnings in 2018.
Jim Hackett was announced to replace Mark Fields as CEO of Ford Motor.
Mr. Hackett most recently oversaw the formation of Ford Smart Mobility, a unit responsible for experimenting with car-sharing programs, self-driving ventures and other programs aimed at helping Ford better compete with Uber. Alphabet Incorporated and other tech giants looking to edge in on the auto industry.
On April 25, 2018, Ford announced that it would discontinue passenger cars in the North American market in the next 4 years, except for the Mustang, due to declining demand and profitability.
The Focus Active, a crossover SUV based on the newly unveiled 4th generation Focus, was also intended to be marketed in the United States.
Due to the vehicle being manufactured in China, Ford later announced that it would not release the Focus Active in the United States due to tariffs imposed by the Trump administration on Chinese exports. In March 2020, the Detroit United Auto Workers Union announced that after discussion with the leaders of General Motors, Ford, and Fiat Chrysler automobiles, the car makers would partially shut down factories on a rotating basis to mitigate the COVID-19 pandemic.
On March 24, representatives of Ford announced that production in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico would not resume on March 30 as originally planned amid the further coronavirus pandemic spread.
In the first quarter of 2020, Ford sales dropped by 15%, entailing a loss of $2 billion. With a change in the demand for the sport vehicles on January 6, 2021, Ford reported a sales fall of 9.8% in the fourth quarter, selling 542,749 vehicles, compared to 601,862 in 2019.
In April 2021, Ford said that it would provide COVID-19 vaccines for its employees who were to obtain them at the company. At the beginning, the vaccination program would be in Southeast Michigan, Missouri, and Ohio, but it was to be expanded later on to other locations.
In March 2022, Ford announced that it would restructure the company into 3 separate divisions.
Ford Model E is to focus on electric vehicles. Ford Blue is to focus on internal combustion vehicles. And the existing commercial division is to be rebranded as Ford Pro to focus on vehicle distribution and service.
In August 2022, Ford announced it planned layoffs of roughly 3,000 employees and contract workers, confirming earlier reporting.
The cuts would mostly affect divisions in the U.S., Canada, and India, which Jim Farley said would allow the company to prepare for the future of electric, software-heavy vehicles.
In February 2023, Ford announced that it was going to cut 3,800 jobs across Europe, with the job cuts mainly focusing on their German and British workforce.
Ford will be cutting 2,300 jobs from Germany, 1,300 from the United Kingdom, and an additional 200 jobs in the rest of Europe, according to the head of Ford Germany, Martin Sander.
The cuts will mainly be done to the company's engineers.
Ford also announced during the year that their electric vehicle business had lost $3 billion before taxes over the past 2 years and will lose a similar amount in 2023 as the company looks to significantly invest in electric technology.
The Ford Model E is expected to be profitable by 2026. In April 2023, United Kingdom ministers approved Ford's Blue Cruise technology.
Because of this assisted driving technology, Ford drivers can now legally take their hands off the wheel on certain roads.
Its top speed is 129 kilometers per hour, 80 miles per hour.
Blue Cruise uses sensors and cameras to regulate the car's speed and to keep track of speed limits and road signs.
It also monitors and keeps a safe distance from other vehicles.
It also comes equipped with an eye tracking system.
If the driver stops looking at the road, then the car will gradually reduce its speed.
This technology will initially be offered in Ford's 2023 model of the electric Mustang Mach-E SUV.
According to Factom Research, an automotive research company, this model is not a self-driving car.
It is classified as a Level 2 or partial automation assistance system.
This means that technology controls two or more driving aspects but still requires human driver control in cases of emergencies.
The driver is still legally responsible for accidents.
In August 2024, Pennsylvania State Police filed charges against the driver that killed two men while using Blue Cruise. In November 2024, Ford announced that it would cut 800 jobs in the UK and 2,900 in Germany to try to reduce costs. The Ford Motor Company is an American automaker, the world's fifth largest, based on worldwide vehicle sales.
Based in Dearborn, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit, it was founded by Henry Ford on June 16, 1903.
Ford Motor Company would go on to become one of the largest and most profitable companies in the world.
The largest family-controlled company in the world, the Ford Motor Company, has been in continuous family control for over 110 years.
Ford now encompasses two brands, Ford and Lincoln.
Ford once owned 5 other luxury brands, Volvo, Land Rover, Jaguar, Aston Martin, and Mercury.
Over time, those brands were sold to other companies and Mercury was discontinued. Henry Ford built his first automobile, which he called a quadricycle, at his home in Detroit in 1896.
The location has been redeveloped, where the Michigan building now stands, and the tracks for the Detroit People Mover and the Times Square People Mover station are nearby.
At the entrance to the Michigan building, there is a commemorative plaque identifying the original location of the Ford home.
The coal shed has been recreated using the original bricks at Greenfield Village in nearby Dearborn.
His initial foray into automobile manufacturing was the Detroit Automobile Company, founded in 1899.
The company foundered and in 1901 was reorganized as the Henry Ford Company.
In March 1902, after falling out with his financial backers, Ford left the company with rights to his name and $900. Henry Ford turned to an acquaintance, coal dealer Alexander Malcolmson, to help finance another automobile company.
Malcolmson put up the money to start the partnership. Ford and Malcolmson and the pair designed the car and began ordering parts.
However, by February 1903, Ford and Malcolmson had gone through more money than expected, and the manufacturing firm of John and Morris Dodge, who had made parts for Ford and Malcolmson, was demanding payment.
Malcolmson, constrained by his coal business demands, turned to his uncle John Simpson Gray, the president of the German-American Savings Bank and a good friend.
Malcolmson proposed incorporating Ford and Malcolmson to bring in new investors, and wanted Gray to join the company, thinking that Gray's name would attract other investors.
Gray was not interested at first, but Malcolmson promised he could withdraw his share at any time, so Gray reluctantly agreed.
On the strength of Gray's name, Malcolmson recruited other business acquaintances to invest, including local merchants Albert Strollo and Vernon Fry, lawyers John Anderson and Morris Rackham, Charles T. Bennett of the Daisy Air Rifle Company, and his own clerk James Cousins.
Malcolmson also convinced the Dodges to accept stock in lieu of payment.
On June 16, 1903, the Ford Motor Company was incorporated, with 12 investors owning a total of 1,000 shares.
Ford and Malcolmson together retained 51% of the new company in exchange for their earlier investments.
When the total stock ownership was tabulated, shares in the company were Henry Ford, 255 shares, Alexander Malcolmson, 255 shares, John Simpson Gray, 105 shares, John W. Anderson, 50 shares, Horace Rackham, 50 shares, Horace Elgin Dodge, 50 shares, John Francis Dodge, 50 shares, Charles T. Bennett, 50 shares, Vernon C. Fry, 50 shares, Albert Strollo, 50 shares, James Cousins, 25 shares, and Charles J. Woodall, 10 shares. At the first stockholder meeting on June 18, Gray was elected president, Ford vice president, and James Cousins secretary.
Despite Gray's misgivings, the Ford Motor Company was immediately profitable, with profits by October 1, 1903, of almost $37,000.
A dividend of 10% was paid that October, an additional dividend of 20% at the beginning of 1904, and another 68% in June 1904.
Two dividends of 100% each in June and July 1905 brought the total investor profits to nearly 300% in just over 2 years. 1905 total profits were almost $300,000.
However, there were internal frictions in the company that Gray was nominally in charge of.
Most of the investors, both Malcolmson and Gray included, had their own businesses to attend to. Only Ford and Cousins worked full-time at the company.
The issue came to a head when the principal stockholders, Ford and Malcolmson, quarreled over the future direction of the company.
Gray sided with Ford.
By early 1906, Malcolmson was effectively frozen out of the Ford Motor Company, and in May sold his shares to Henry Ford.
John Simpson Gray died unexpectedly in 1906, and his position as Ford's president was taken over by Ford himself soon afterward.
Ford was subject to lawsuits or threats from the Association of Licensed Automobile Manufacturers early in its history.
The association claimed patent rights to most gasoline-powered automobiles.
After several years of legal wrangling, the association eventually dropped its case against Ford in 1911. During its early years, the company produced a range of vehicles designated chronologically from the Ford Model A 1903 to the Model K and Model S, Ford's last right-hand steering model of 1907.
The K, Ford's first six-cylinder model, was known as the Gentleman's Roadster and the Silent Cyclone, and sold for US $2,800. By contrast, around that time, the MG40 was priced at US $2,000, the Colt Runabout US $1,500, the high-volume Oldsmobile Runabout US $650. Western scale model US $500, and the success hit the amazingly low US $250.
In 1908, Henry Ford introduced the Model T.
Earlier models were produced at a rate of only a few a day at a rented factory on Mack Avenue in Detroit, Michigan, and later at the Paquette Avenue plant, the first company-owned factory, with groups of 2 or 3 men working on each car, from components made to order by other companies, what would come to be called an assembled car.
The first Model Ts were built at the Paquette Avenue plant, and in the car's first full year of production, 1909, just over 10,000 Model Ts were built.
As demand for the car grew, the company moved production to the much larger Highland Park plant in 1910.
In 1911, 69,762 Model Ts were produced, with 170,211 in 1912.
By 1913, the company had developed all of the basic techniques of the assembly line and mass production.
Ford introduced the world's first moving assembly line that year, which reduced chassis assembly time from 12.5 hours in October to 2 hours 40 minutes, and ultimately 1 hour 33 minutes, and boosted annual output to 202,667 units that year.
Whoa!
After Ford had promised profit sharing if sales hit 300,000 between August 1914 and August 1915. Sales in 1914 reached 308,162 and 501,462 in 1915. By 1920, production would exceed 1 million a year.
These innovations were hard on employees, and turnover of workers was very high, while increased productivity reduced labor demand.
Turnover meant delays and extra costs of training and use of slow workers.
In January 1914, Ford solved the employee turnover problem by doubling pay to $5 a day, cutting shifts from 9 hours to an 8-hour day for a 5-day work week, which also increased sales. A line worker could buy a T with less than 4 months' pay, and instituting hiring practices that identified the best workers, including disabled people, considered unemployable by other firms.
Employee turnover plunged. productivity soared, and with it, the cost per vehicle plummeted.
Ford cut prices again and again and invented the system of franchise dealers who were loyal to his brand name.
Wall Street had criticized Ford's generous labor practices when he began paying workers enough to buy the products they made.
While Ford attained international status in 1904 with the founding of Ford of Canada, it was in 1911 the company began to rapidly expand overseas with the opening of assembly plants in Ireland, 1917, England and France. Followed by Denmark, 1923, Germany, 1925, Austria, 1925, and Argentina, 1925.
A factory was opened in Japan, 1925, at Yokohama, and also in South Africa, 1924, and Australia, 1925. As subsidiaries of Ford of Canada due to preferential tariff rules for Commonwealth countries.
By the end of 1919, Ford was producing 50% of all cars in the United States and 40% of all British ones. By 1920, half of all cars in the US were Model Ts.
The low price also killed the cycle car in the US.
The assembly line transformed the industry. Soon, companies without it risked bankruptcy.
Of 200 U.S. car makers in 1920, only 17 were left in 1940.
It also transformed technology.
Henry Ford is reported to have said, "Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants so long as it is black."
Before the assembly line, Ts had been available in a variety of colors, including red, blue, and green, but not black.
Now, paint had become a production bottleneck. Only Japan Black dried quickly enough, and not until Duco Lacquer appeared in 1926 would other colors reappear on the T.
In 1915, Henry Ford went on a peace mission to Europe aboard a ship, joining other pacifists in efforts to stop World War I.
This led to an increase in his personal popularity.
Ford would subsequently go on to support the war effort with a Model T becoming the underpinnings for Allied military vehicles, like the Ford 310 M1918 tank and the 1916 ambulance. By 1916, the company had accumulated a capital surplus of $60 million, but Henry Ford declared that he intended to end special dividends for shareholders in favor of massive investments in new plants, including the River Rouge plant, allowing Ford to dramatically increase production and the number of people employed at his plants, at the same time as cutting the prices of his cars.
The Dodge brothers, John Francis Dodge and Morris Elgin Dodge, the largest non-family shareholders with 10% of the company, objected and took Ford to court in 1917 in an often-cited case, Dodge v. Ford Motor Company.
The judge found in their favor, requiring a $19 million special dividend.
The decision was then upheld in the 1919 appeal to the Michigan Supreme Court, which stated that
a business corporation is organized and carried on primarily for the profit of the stockholders. The powers of the directors are to be employed for that end. The discretion of directors is to be exercised in the choice of means to attain that end, and does not extend to a change in the end itself, to the reduction of profits, or to the non-distribution of profits among stockholders, in order to devote them to other purposes.
In response, Henry Ford determined to buy out the remaining shareholders.
to encourage this, he threatened to leave and set up a rival company, offering to buy out the minority shareholders at varying prices.
He gained complete control in July 1919 at a cost of $125 million, made up of $106 million of the stock and $19 million in court-ordered dividend. Financed with a $75 million loan from two Eastern banks.
The Dodge brothers received $25 million.
At this time, Edsel Ford also succeeded his father as president of the company, although Henry still kept a hand in management. While prices were kept low through highly efficient engineering, the company neglected consumer demand for improved vehicles.
So, while four-wheel brakes were invented by Earl Johnson and were used on the 1909 Archel, they did not appear on a Ford until 1927, only a year before Chevrolet.
Ford steadily lost market share to GM and Chrysler as these and other domestic and foreign competitors began offering fresher automobiles with more innovative features and luxury options.
GM had a range of models, from relatively cheap to luxury, tapping all price points in the spectrum, while less wealthy people purchased used Model Ts.
The competitors also opened up new markets by extending credit for purchases, so consumers could buy these expensive automobiles with monthly payments.
Ford initially resisted this approach, insisting such debts would ultimately hurt the consumer and the general economy.
Ford eventually relented and started offering the same terms in December 1927 when Ford unveiled the redesigned Model A and retired the Model T after producing 15 million units.
An early version of the Ford script in the oval badge was first used on the 1928 Model A. The Ford script had been created in 1903 by Child Harold Wilson and the oval trademark in 1907.
On February 4, 1922, Ford expanded its reach into the luxury auto market through its acquisition of the Lincoln Motor Company from Henry Martin Leland, who had founded and named the company in 1917 for Abraham Lincoln, whom Henry Leland admired.
The Mercury division was established later in 1938 to serve the mid-price auto market between the Ford and Lincoln brands.
Ford Motor Company dedicated the largest museum of American history in 1929, the Henry Ford.
Henry Ford would go on to acquire Abraham Lincoln's chair, which he was assassinated in, from the owners of Ford's Theater.
Abraham Lincoln's chair would be displayed along with John Fitzgerald Kennedy's Lincoln presidential limousine in the Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village in Dearborn, known today as the Henry Ford.
Kennedy's limousine was leased to the White House by Ford.
In 1928, Henry Ford negotiated a deal with the government of Brazil for a plot of land in the Amazon rainforest.
There, Ford attempted to cultivate rubber for use in the company's automobiles.
After considerable labor unrest, social experimentation, failure to produce rubber, and the invention of synthetic rubber, the settlement was sold in 1945 and abandoned. During the Great Depression in the United States, Ford, in common with other manufacturers, responded to the collapse in motor sales by reducing the scale of their operations and laying off workers.
By 1932, the unemployment rate in Detroit had risen to 30%, with thousands of families facing real hardship.
Although Ford did assist a small number of distressed families with loans and parcels of land to work, the majority of the thousands of unskilled workers who were laid off were left to cope on their own.
However, Henry Ford angered many by making public statements that the unemployed should do more to find work for themselves.
This led to Detroit's Unemployed Council organizing the Ford Hunger March.
On March 7, 1932, some 3,000 to 5,000 unemployed workers assembled in West Detroit to march on Ford's River Rouge plant to deliver a petition demanding more support.
As the march moved up Miller Road and approached Gate 3, the protest turned ugly.
The police fired tear gas into the crowd and fire trucks were used to soak the protesters with icy water.
When the protesters responded by throwing rocks, the violence escalated rapidly and culminated in the police and plant security guards firing live rounds through the gates of the plant at the unarmed protesters.
4 men were killed outright and a 5th died later in the hospital.
Up to 60 more were seriously injured. In May 1929, the Soviet Union signed an agreement with the Ford Motor Company.
Under its terms, the Soviets agreed to purchase $13 million worth of automobiles and parts, while Ford agreed to give technical assistance until 1938 to construct an integrated automobile manufacturing plant at Nizhny Novgorod.
Many American engineers and skilled auto workers moved to the Soviet Union to work on the plant's next production lines, which was named Gorkovsky TaBNWNE Gas, or Gorky Automotive Plant in 1932.
A few American workers stayed on after the plant's completion and eventually became victims of Stalin's Great Terror, either shot or exiled to Soviet gulags.
In 1933, the Soviets completed construction on a production line for the Ford Model A passenger car called the Gaz A and the light truck, the Gaz AA or AA.
Both these Ford models were immediately adopted for military use.
By the late 1930s, production at Gorky was 80,000 to 90,000 Russian Ford vehicles per year.
With its original Ford designed vehicle supplemented by imports and domestic copies of imported equipment, the Gorky operations eventually produced a range of automobiles, trucks, and military vehicles.
Ford's assistance in establishing automobile production played a significant role in the victory of the Soviet Union in World War II in 1944. Stalin wrote a letter to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce stating that Henry Ford was one of the world's greatest industrialists. During the first 27 months of World War II, when the U.S. was neutral, to December 1941, Ford was hesitant to participate in the Allied military effort.
Ford insisted that peaceful trade was the best way to avoid war.
Ford had a subsidiary in Germany.
In 1936, a Ford executive visiting Germany was informed by a Nazi official that Ford's Cologne plant manager was a Jew. He had one grandparent who was Jewish, prompting discussions at Ford offices in both Germany and the U.S.
Heinrich Albert, Ford's Germany-U.S. liaison, insisted that the manager be fired.
The manager was replaced by Robert Schmidt, who would play an important role in Germany's war effort.
Henry Ford had said war was a waste of time and did not want to profit from it.
He was concerned the Nazis during the 1930s might nationalize Ford factories in Germany.
Ford nevertheless established a close collaboration with Germany's Nazi government before the war, so close, in fact, that Ford received, in July 1938, the Grand Cross of the German Eagle Medal from the regime.
Ford's outspoken anti-Semitism, including his newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, which published the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, also lent credence to the view that he sympathized with the Nazis.
In the spring of 1939, the Nazi government assumed day-to-day control of many foreign-owned factories in Germany.
However, Ford's Dearborn headquarters continued to maintain a 52% ownership over its German factories, but with no voice or control or financial reward.
Ford factories contributed significantly to the buildup of Germany's armed forces.
Ford negotiated a resource-sharing agreement that allowed the German military to access scarce supplies, particularly rubber.
During this same period, Ford was hesitant to participate in the Allied military effort.
In June 1940, after France had fallen to the Wehrmacht, Henry Ford personally vetoed a plan to build airplane engines for the Allies.
The company enthusiastically supported the war effort after Pearl Harbor, making it a major component of the arsenal of democracy that President Roosevelt had promised would mobilize industrial resources to win the war.
Henry, aged 76 and early senile, played a minor role even though he had 55% ownership of the company's stock.
His son Edsel Ford, the company president and owner of 42% of the stock, had never been a pacifist like his father and now made all the decisions. The company produced 390,000 tanks and trucks, 27,000 engines, 270,000 jeeps, over 8,000 B-24 Liberators, and hundreds of thousands of parts, gun mounts, and machine tools for the war effort.
It ranked third among corporations in the value of wartime production contracts.
The company's new Willow Run factory was designed for the production of B-24 bombers, although the production line was initially characterized by bungling and incompetence.
Ford's efforts benefited the Allies as well as the Axis.
After Bentham invented the Jeep, the U.S. War Department handed production over to Ford and Willys. The U.S. Treasury Department investigated Ford for alleged collaboration with German-run Ford plants in occupied France, but did not find conclusive evidence.
By 1998, Ford's business dealings with Nazi Germany and alleged profiteering from Nazi Germany became the subject of lawsuits.
After the war, Schmidt and other Nazi-era managers kept their jobs with Ford's German division.
In the United Kingdom, Ford built a new factory in Trafford Park, Manchester during WW2 where over 34,000 Rolls-Royce Merlin Aero engines were completed by a workforce trained from scratch.
In 1943, a despondent Edsel Ford died of stomach cancer.
Henry decided then to resume direct control of the company, but this proved a very poor idea as he was 78 years old and suffering from heart problems and atherosclerosis.
His mental state was also questionable, and there was a very real possibility that the company would collapse if he died or became incapacitated.
The Roosevelt administration had a contingency plan in place to nationalize Ford if need be so that they wouldn't lose vital military production.
At this point, Ford's wife and daughter-in-law intervened and demanded that he turn control over to his grandson Henry Ford too.
They threatened to sell off their stock, amounting to half the company's total shares, if he refused.
Henry was infuriated, but there was nothing he could do, and so he gave in.
When Henry II, who came to be called affectionately Hank the Deuce, assumed command. The company was losing US $9 million a month and in financial chaos.
Henry Ford died of a brain hemorrhage on April 7, 1947.
Mourners passed by at a rate of 5,000 each hour at the public viewing on Wednesday of that week at Greenfield Village in Dearborn.
The funeral service for Henry Ford was held at the Cathedral Church of St. Paul in Detroit on Thursday, April 9, 1947.
At the funeral service, 20,000 people stood outside St. Paul's Cathedral in the ring with 600 inside. While the funeral had attracted national attention as an estimated 7 million people had mourned his death, according to A&E biography.
Ernest Robert Breach, head of Bendix Aviation, was hired in 1946 and became first executive vice president, then board chairman in 1955.
Henry II served as president from 1945 to 1960 and as chairman and CEO from 1960 to 1980.
In 1956, Ford became a publicly traded corporation.
The Ford family maintains about 40% controlling interest in the company through a series of special Class B preferred stocks.
Also in 1956, following its emphasis on safety improvements in new models, Motor Trend awarded the company its Car of the Year award. In 1946, Robert McNamara joined Ford as manager of planning and financial analysis.
Ford's recruitment process was designed to identify and sort out potential homosexual applicants.
McNamara was amused by the following question in his psychological testing: what would you rather be, a florist or a coal miner?
Robert McNamara advanced rapidly through a series of top-level management positions to the presidency of Ford on 9 November 1960, one day after John Fitzgerald Kennedy's election.
The first company head selected outside the Ford family, McNamara had gained the favor of Henry Ford II and had aided in Ford's expansion and success in the post-war period.
Less than 5 weeks after becoming president at Ford, he accepted Kennedy's invitation to join his cabinet as Secretary of Defense.
Ford introduced the iconic Thunderbird in 1955 and the Edsel brand automobile line in 1958, following a US $250 million research and marketing campaign which had failed to ask questions crucial for the marque's success.
The Edsel was cancelled after less than 27 months in the marketplace in November 1960.
The corporation bounced back from the failure of the Edsel by introducing its compact Falcon in 1960 and the Mustang in 1964.
By 1967, Ford of Europe was established.
Lee Iacocca was involved with the design of several successful Ford automobiles, most notably the Mustang.
He was also the moving force, as one court put it, behind the notorious Pinto.
He promoted other ideas which did not reach the marketplace as Ford products.
Eventually, he became the president of the company, but clashed with Punky Knudsen as well as Henry II, and ultimately, on July 13, 1978, he was fired by Henry Ford II, despite the company's having earned a $2.2 billion profit for the year.
Chrysler soon hired Iacocca, which he returned to profitability during the 1980s. In 1942, Ilsa Ivanova, who was then 16 years old and a resident of Rostov in the Soviet Union, and many other citizens of countries that were occupied by the Wehrmacht were transported in cattle cars to the western part of Germany, where they were displayed to visiting businessmen.
From there, Ivanova and others were forced to become slave laborers for Ford's German subsidiary, which had become separated from the Dearborn headquarters as a result of a U.S. declaration of war.
On March 4, 1998, 53 years after she was liberated from the German Ford plant, Ilsa Ivanova demanded justice, filing a class action lawsuit in U.S. District Court against the Ford Motor Company.
In court, Ford admitted that Ivanova and many others like her were forced to endure a sad and terrible experience. Ford, however, moved to have the suit dismissed on the grounds that it would be best redressed on a nation-to-nation, government-to-government basis.
In 1999, the court dismissed Ivanova's suit.
At about the same time, a number of German companies, including GM subsidiary Opel, agreed to contribute $5.1 billion to a fund to compensate the surviving slave laborers.
After being the subject of much adverse publicity, Ford, in March 2000, agreed to contribute $13 million to the compensation fund. In 1979, Philip Caldwell became chairman, succeeded in 1985 by Donald Peterson.
Harold Cohen served as chairman and CEO from 1990 to 1993.
Alex Trotman was chairman and CEO from 1993 to 1998, and Chuck Nasser served at the helm from 1999 to 2001.
Henry Ford's great-grandson, William Clay Ford Jr., is the company's current chairman of the board and was CEO until September 5, 2006, when he named Alan Muley from Boeing as his successor.
In April 2000, the Ford Motor Company announced its recapitalization plan, distributing about half of its $24 billion cash forward and paying a $10 billion special dividend, and the issuance of additional stock to the Ford family to provide more flexibility for the Ford family in terms of estate planning.
In 2000, Ford's cash hoard was the largest of any company in the world.
As of 2006, the Ford family owned about 5% of company shares outstanding. In December 2006, Ford announced it would mortgage all assets, including factories and equipment, office property, intellectual property, patents and blue oval trademarks, and its stakes in subsidiaries, to raise $23.4 billion in cash.
Whoa!
The secured credit line was expected to finance product development during the restructuring through 2009, as the company expected to burn through $17 billion in cash before turning a profit.
The action was unprecedented in the company's 103-year history.
At the end of 2012, Ford Motor Company's cash balance was $22.9 billion and was listed as 10 on the list of U.S. non-financial corporation sector's top 10 cash kings by Moody's Investors Service in their March 2013 annual report on global credit research.
General corporate timeline. 1896, Henry Ford built his first vehicle, the quadricycle, on a buggy frame with 4 bicycle wheels.
1898, Ford creates the Detroit Automobile Company. 2.5 years later it is dissolved.
1901, Ford wins high-profile car race in Grosse Pointe, Michigan.
The Henry Ford Company is incorporated but discontinued the following year only, to be reinvigorated by Henry Leland as the Cadillac Motor Company. 1903, Ford Motor Company, incorporated with 11 original investors.
The Model A Ford Mobile is introduced. 1,708 cars are produced. 1904, Ford Motor Company of Canada, incorporated in Walkerville, Ontario.
Henry Ford teams up with Harvey Firestone of Firestone Tires. 1906, Ford becomes the top-selling brand in the U.S. with 8,729 cars produced.
1908, Model T is introduced.
15 million are produced through 1927. 1909, Ford Motor Company, England, established, otherwise referred to as Ford of Britain.
1911, Ford opens first factory outside North America in Manchester, England.
1913, the moving assembly line is introduced at Highland Park Assembly Plant, making Model T production 8 times faster.
Ford opens second world branch in Argentina at Ford Motor Argentina. 1914, Ford introduces $5, $157, adjusted for inflation, wage for a workday, double the existing rate.
1916, Société Française d'Automobiles Ford, incorporated in Bordeaux, France, by Percival Perry, the head of Ford of Britain.
1918, construction of the Rouge Assembly Complex begins.
1919, Edsel Ford succeeds Henry as company president.
1920, Ford temporarily shuts down due to low sales.
After removing unnecessary administrative expenses and waste, Ford reopens. 1921, Ford production exceeds 1 million cars per year, nearly 10 times more than Chevrolet, the next biggest selling brand.
1922, Ford purchases Lincoln Motor Company for US $8 million, $150 million, adjusted for inflation.
1925, Ford introduces Ford Tri-Motor Airplane for airline services, and the factory was built in Yokohama, Japan in February.
1926, Ford Australia is founded in Geelong, Victoria, Australia.
1927, Model T production ends. Ford introduces the next generation Model A from the Rouge Complex.
1929, Ford regains production crown, with annual production peaking at 1.5 million cars.
1931, Ford and Chevy brands begin to alternate as U.S. production leaders in battle for automobile sales during the Great Depression.
1932, Ford introduces the one-piece cast V8 block.
It makes the Model 18 the first low-priced V8 powered car.
In London Royal Albert Hall, the Model 19, or as it was marketed Model Y, are introduced February 19.
The first of a long line of small European Fords. 1936, Lincoln Zephyr is introduced.
1938, the German consul at Cleveland awards Henry Ford the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the highest medal Nazi Germany could bestow on a foreigner.
1939, Mercury Division is formed to fill the gap between economical Fords and luxury Lincolns.
Operated as a division at Ford until 1945. 1941, the Lincoln Continental is introduced.
Ford begins building general-purpose Jeep for the military.
First labor agreement with UAWCIO covers North American employees.
1942. Reduction of civilian vehicles halted, diverting factory capacity to producing V-24 Liberator bombers, tanks, and other products for the war effort.
1943. Edsel Ford dies of cancer at the age of 49. Henry Ford resumes presidency.
1945. Henry Ford II becomes president.
1945. Lincoln and Mercury are combined into a single division.
1946. Ford sues the Allies for damages done to factories in Dresden during the infamous bombing and wins compensation.
1946. The Whiz Kids, former U.S. Army Air Force officers, are hired to revitalize the company.
Automobile production resumes. 1947. Henry Ford dies of cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 83. Henry Ford II becomes new chairman.
1948. F1 truck introduced.
Lincoln Continental is introduced. 1949. The 49 Ford introduces all new post-war era cars.
The Woody station wagon is introduced. 1953. Ford Canada headquarters in Parkland opens in Oakville, Ontario.
1953. The company celebrated its 50th anniversary by purchasing 2 hours of prime time on the CBS and NBC networks for the Ford 50th anniversary show that attracted an audience of 60 million.
1954. Thunderbird sports car introduced.
The Thunderbird was marketed as a personal car.
Ford begins crash testing and opens Arizona proving grounds.
1956. Ford World Headquarters dedicated September 26, 1956.
1956. $10,000, $117,088, adjusted for inflation. Lincoln Continental Mark II introduced.
Ford goes public with common stock shares.
Ford's emphasis on safety with its lifeguard option package, including seatbelts and dash padding, earns the company Motor Trend's Car of the Year award.
1957. Ford launches the Edsel brand of automobiles in the fall of 1957 as 1958 models.
Ford is top-selling brand with 1.68 million automobiles produced. 1957. Second-generation Thunderbird introduced.
The second-generation Thunderbird was the first high-volume, personal luxury car. 1959. Ford Credit Corporation formed to provide automotive financing.
1959. Ford withdraws the 1960 Model Edsels from the market in November 1959.
1960. Ford Galaxy and compact Ford Falcon introduced.
1960. Robert McNamara is appointed president of Ford by Chairman Henry Ford II.
1960. Ford President Robert McNamara appointed Secretary of Defense by President-elect John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
1962. Ford of Britain launched its first generation of the Ford Cortina.
It would dominate the mid-size family segment in Europe for the next 20 years. 1964. Ford Mustang introduced.
The Mustang was one of the cars that started the Tony Car class.
Ford GT40 challenges Ferrari and Porsche at Le Mans.
1965, Ford brand US sales exceed 2 million units.
Ford of Germany and Ford of Britain jointly launched the first-generation Ford Transit range of panel vans. 1965, Ford Galaxy 500 Ltd debuts, advertised as quieter than a Rolls-Royce.
1966, Ford Bronco Sport utility vehicle introduced.
1967, Ford of Europe is established by merging the operations of Ford of Britain and Ford of Germany.
1967, Ford opens Talbotville car plant in St. Thomas, Ontario.
1968, Lincoln Mark Series is introduced as the company's first personal luxury car to compete with a Cadillac Eldorado.
Ford of Europe launches first-generation Ford Escort. 1970, Ford Maverick car introduced.
Ford establishes Asia-Pacific operations.
Ford of Europe launches the third-generation Cortina/Taunus, merging the two previously independent product lines under a common platform.
Saarlouis assembly plant in Germany opens. 1972, retractable seatbelts introduced.
Project Bobcat, Ford's largest single vehicle, project to date, is initiated to develop the company's first front-wheel drive, compact hatchback model.
Will emerge as the Fiesta in 1976.
1973, Ford U.S. brand sales reaches an all-time high of 2.35 million vehicles produced.
1974, Ford Mustang II debuts as a smaller, more economical pony car.
Ford of Europe launches second-generation Capri, is again sold under the Mercury brand in North American markets. 1975, Ford Granada and Mercury Monarch introduced. Production of the Maverick dropped in 1975, with the release of the Granada as a more European-style luxury compact.
Ford of Europe launches the second-generation Escort. 1976, Ford of Europe formally launches the first-generation Ford Fiesta, and later that year the fourth-generation Cortina/Taunus.
Opening of the Valencia assembly plant in Spain. 1977, Ford of Europe launches the second-generation Granada.
1978, Ford Motor Company celebrates 75th anniversary.
Continental Mark V and Thunderbird available with Diamond Jubilee Edition packages.
Fiesta is imported from Europe as an entry into the economy segment.
1979, Ford acquires 25% stake in Mazda.
Ford becomes the final American automaker to introduce downsized full-size cars with radically smaller Panther platform. 1980, Ford of Europe launches the third-generation Escort. It is voted European Car of the Year for 1981.
1981, the Lincoln Town Car and Ford Escort are introduced.
Fiesta discontinued in North America. 1982, Ford of Europe introduced the Ford Sierra and in production of the stalwart Cortina/Taunus after 20 years and 4 generations.
1983, Ford launches a redesigned Aero Design Thunderbird.
In a model shift, the Granada is discontinued in North America, replaced by a facelifted model rebranded as the LTD.
All full-size models are now Ltd Crown Victoria/Country Squires.
1984, Ford Tempo and Mercury Topaz are introduced, replacing the Ford Fairmont/Mercury Zephyr.
1985, Ford Scorpio, launched by Ford of Europe.
Replaces Granada as its full-size offering and is voted European Car of the Year for 1986, Ford's second COTY win in the 1980s.
Mercury brand launched to market the Sierra and Scorpio models in North America.
Purchased its first nationwide financial corporation, a savings and loan, for $493 million in cash.
Ford Taurus, introduced with dramatic aero design, styling, along with Ford Aerostar minivan.
Taurus is one of Ford's best-selling models, with 7 million units sold, ranks among the fourth best-selling car in Ford's history, behind only the F-150, Model T and Mustang. 1986, Ford of Europe launches the second generation of the Transit van family.
Ford Capri ceases production. 1987, Ford acquires Aston Martin Lagonda and Hertz Rent-A-Car.
Henry Ford II dies at age 70. 1988, Ford Festiva, built in Korean like Kia, is introduced.
1989, Ford acquires Jaguar.
Mazda MX-5 Miata is unveiled.
Third generation Fiesta is launched in Europe and establishes itself as the fastest selling generation of Fiesta to date, 1 million units in less than 2 years.
Acquires Associates First Capital Corporation, a finance company from Gulf and Western Industries.
In 1998, it is spun off to Ford shareholders.
1990, Ford Aerostar is Motor Trend's Truck of the Year, while Lincoln Town Car is Motor Trend's Car of the Year.
Mercury brand of automobiles production discontinued.
Ford of Europe launches fourth generation Escort.
1991, Ford Explorer is introduced, turning the traditionally rural and recreational SUV into a popular family vehicle.
1992, Ford Aerostar and Ford Taurus/Mercury Sable are redesigned. Ford Taurus becomes America's top-selling car, displacing the Honda Accord.
Ford of Europe announced its first-generation Ford Mondeo, the first product of the global TaBNWNE platform. 1992, redesigned Ford Crown Victoria and Mercury Grand Marquis launched, the first new full-size sedans in 13 years. Ford Country Squire/Mercury Colony Park Station Wagon discontinued.
1993, Ford launches Mondeo in Europe and announces its North American derivatives, the Ford Contour and Mercury Mystique.
1994, Ford Tempo and Mercury Topaz are discontinued, replaced by Ford Contour and Mercury Mystique.
1994, Ford Aspire replaces Festiva, becoming the first car in its class to offer standard dual airbags and optional four-wheel ABS.
After large losses, First Nationwide was sold for $1.1 billion to First Madison Bank, which merged while keeping the First Nationwide name. 1995, Ford's first front-wheel drive V8 sedan is introduced, the 4.6-liter V8, powered Lincoln Continental.
Ford of Europe launches fourth generation Fiesta.
New front-wheel drive Ford Windstar minivan is introduced.
Aerostar remains in production.
Redesigned Ford Explorer released, now with standard safety features such as dual airbags, 4-wheel ABS as standard equipment.
1996, Ford certifies all plants in 26 countries to ISO 9000 quality and ISO 14001 environmental standards.
The V12 powered Jaguar XJS is discontinued.
Controversially redesigned, Avoid, Ford Taurus and Mercury Sable are introduced.
Discontinuation of Chevrolet Capris leaves full-size fleet market to Ford Crown Victoria.
Ford increases investment stake in a troubled Mazda corporation to a controlling interest of 33.4%.
1997, full-size four-door SUV Ford Expedition introduced to replace the Ford Bronco.
Mercury Mountaineer introduced.
Redesigned Ford Escort and Mercury Tracer also introduced.
Ford Aerostar production ends, along with Ford Probe, Ford Thunderbird, Mercury Cougar, Mazda MX-6, and Ford Aspire, without immediate replacement.
Sculpted redesign of Ford's top-selling F-150 pickup overcomes controversy to set sales records.
1998, Lincoln Navigator introduced.
Mark 8 is in its final year, introduces HID headlamps, midway through model year 1996. 1998, the Focus replaces the Asian Escort in Europe and quickly becomes one of the best-selling cars of the segment.
Is launched in North America for the 2000 model year. 1999, Ford acquires Volvo car division from Volvo.
Bill Ford becomes chairman of the board, replacing Jacques Nasser.
A smaller sporty Mercury Cougar is reintroduced with front-wheel drive.
Jaguar Racing Formula One team is formed, with Jackie Stewart at the helm.
Ford splits its full-sized pickups into two distinct models, the first to do so, with the introduction of the Ford F-Series Super Duty F-250 to F-550.
Ford Excursion, based on Super Duty, is introduced and has the distinction of being the largest SUV sold anywhere. 2000, Ford purchases Land Rover brand from BMW.
Lincoln LS and Jaguar S-Type are introduced, along with a refreshed Ford Taurus and Mercury Sable.
The Lincoln LS becomes the 2000 Motor Trend Car of the Year.
Escort is discontinued in Europe.
Third generation Transit platform is launched in Europe.
2001, retro-style Ford Thunderbird is introduced, based on the Lincoln LS/Jaguar S-Type TaBNWNE platform, and is also named Motor Trend Car of the Year for 2002.
2002, fifth generation Fiesta is launched by Ford of Europe.
2002, Lincoln Continental is discontinued after a roughly 50-year run.
Jaguar X-Type is introduced, first AWD Jaguar.
Escort van production ends in Europe, marking the end of the Escort name after a 24-year production run.
Ford Transit Connect production begins at Ford Oxen in Turkey. 2003, Ford Motor Company's 100th anniversary.
The Ford GT is released, along with limited centennial editions of some Ford vehicles. 2004, Jaguar Racing Team sold to Red Bull GmbH.
Ranger sales decline, losing the title as top-selling compact pickup.
The Ford Escape Hybrid, the first gasoline-electric hybrid SUV, is introduced.
Major redesign of the Ford F-150 and introduction of a Lincoln Mark LT.
Ford Freestar and Mercury Monterey minivans are introduced, replacing the Ford Windstar and Mercury Villager.
2005, Ford Mustang, redesigned with retro styling reminiscent of the 1960s models.
The Ford 500, Mercury Montego, and Ford Freestar are introduced.
Mercury Sable production ends, and Ford Taurus production is limited to rental car, taxi, and other fleet sales.
2006, Ford Taurus ends production after a 20-year run.
Ford Fusion, Mercury Milan, and Lincoln Zephyr introduced.
Ford announces major restructuring program The Way Forward, which includes plans to shut unprofitable factories.
Bill Ford steps down as CEO, remains as executive chairman.
Alan Mule elected president and CEO.
Ford Freestar and Mercury Monterey minivans are discontinued without replacement.
Ford mortgages all assets to raise $23.4 billion cash in secured credit lines in order to finance product development during restructuring through 2009.
According to J.D. Power and Associates quality surveys, the Ford Fusion is rated higher in quality than its chief rivals, the Toyota Camry and Honda Accord. 2007, Ford sells Aston Martin to a British consortium led by ProDrive chairman David Richards and announces plans to sell Jaguar and Land Rover.
Ford reports losses of $12.7 billion for 2006.
Ford Edge and Lincoln MKX introduced.
The Lincoln Zephyr is replaced with a Lincoln MKZ.
A redesigned Ford Expedition, including the longer wheelbase EL version and Lincoln Navigator, are introduced.
Ford unveils the Ford Interceptor and Lincoln MKR concept cars, and the pre-production Lincoln MKS is introduced.
The Ford 500, Ford Freestyle and Mercury Montego nameplates are dropped and replaced with a previously retired Ford Taurus, Ford Taurus X, and Mercury Sable nameplates.
2008, Ford sells Jaguar and Land Rover to Tata Motors.
2008, Ford of Europe launches 6th generation Fiesta, based on the Verve concept car.
2009, Ford announces that it will leverage more of its European lineup for the North American market.
The Turkish Hill Transit Connect compact panel van is the first exponent of this strategy, followed by the 6th generation Ford Fiesta subcompact. 2010, Ford sells Volvo cars to Geely Automobile.
Third generation Ford Focus unveiled. As with a first generation car, it will return to using a single platform for all markets, will be released in North America as a 2012 model. 2011, Mercury production ends. The last vehicle is a Grand Marquis.
Lincoln Town Car is discontinued.
Ford Focus Electric unveiled.
Ford announces that they will sell 8 million vehicles globally by 2015. 2011, Ford Ranger, discontinued for North America, redesigned global version launched.
2012, 4th generation Mondeo/Fusion, reviewed at the Detroit Motor Show. Thus reuniting Ford's mid-size platform for Europe and North America for the first time since the CDW27 first generation Mondeo/Contour/Mystique of 1994.
Ford Crown Victoria, sold only for export in 2012, is discontinued. 2013, 4th generation Transit/Tourneo launched, along with a 2nd generation Transit Connect, and the refreshed Fiesta is revealed.
2014, the Ford Mustang celebrates 50 years of production with a launch of its 6th generation.
The 2015 F-150 is launched, featuring an aluminum-intensive body design. 2017, Ford of Europe launches 7th generation Fiesta.
And 2018, the 10 millionth Ford Mustang, the top-ranking sports car in America, gallops off the assembly line.
Ford of Europe launches 4th generation Focus.
Ford announces that it will discontinue all non-SUV and pickup products in North American markets with the exception of the Mustang.
Sources: General Timeline through 2002 Annual Report.
Ford Motor Company.
Archived from the original on February 17, 2007. Throughout its history, the company has faced a wide range of criticisms.
Some have accused the early Fordist model of production of being exploitative. And Ford has been criticized as being willing to collaborate with dictatorships or hire mobs to intimidate union leaders and increase their profits through unethical means.
Ford refused to allow collective bargaining until 1941, with the Ford Service Department being set up as an internal security, intimidation, and espionage unit within the company, and quickly gained a reputation of using violence against union organizers and sympathizers. Ford was also criticized for tread separation and tire disintegration of many Firestone tires installed on Ford Explorers, Mercury Mountaineers, and Mazda Navajos, which caused many crashes during the late 1990s and early 2000s decade.
It is estimated that over 250 deaths and more than 3,000 serious injuries resulted from these failures.
Although Firestone received most of the blame, some blame fell on Ford, which advised customers to underinflate the tires in order to reduce the risk of vehicle rollovers. In 1940, at a time when the German division had begun to use slave labor, Ford work was still under the ownership of Dearborn.
After Pearl Harbor, Ford lost control of its division in Germany, and all the Ford facilities in Germany came under the full control of the Nazi government.
In 1943, the company wrote off all its holdings in Germany as a total loss and never reclaimed them after the war.
The German Ford Company used slave labor in Cologne between 1940 and 1945 and produced military vehicles such as trucks, planes, and ships.
Many of these allegations were made in a series of United States lawsuits in 1998.
The lawsuit was dismissed in 1999 because the judge concluded the issues concerned international treaties between nations and foreign policy and were thus in the realm of the executive branch.
On June 26, 1940, one day after the fall of France, Ford President Edsel Ford was present at a celebratory dinner at the Manhattan Waldorf Astoria, organized by Gerhard Alois Westrick.
Other attendees included Sosthenes NITT, Torquil Weaver of Texaco, James David Mooney of General Motors, and Philip Wagner of the Underwood Typewriter Company.
Defenders of the company argue that the German Ford division, Ford Work, had been taken over by the Nazi government after it rose to power, claiming that it was not under the company's control.
Although Ford's initial motivations were anti-war, the plants in Allied countries were heavily involved in the Allied war effort after the outbreak of war.
Ford's Argentine subsidiary was accused of allegedly collaborating with the Argentine 1976 to 1983 military dictatorship, actively helping in the political repression of intellectuals and dissidents that was pursued by said government.
The company has denied the allegations.
In a lawsuit initiated in 1996 by relatives of some of the estimated 600 Spanish citizens who disappeared in Argentina during the Dirty War, evidence was presented to support the allegation that much of this repression was directed by Ford and the other major industrial firms.
According to a 5,000-page report, Ford executives drew up lists of subversive workers and handed them over to the military task forces, which were allowed to operate within the factories.
These groups allegedly kidnapped, tortured, and murdered workers, at times within the plants themselves. In a second trial, a report brought by the CTA and the testimonies of former Ford workers themselves claimed that the company's Argentine factory was used between 1976 and 1978 as a detention center, and that management allowed the military to set up its own bunker inside the plant. Similarly to General Motors and oil companies ExxonMobil, Shell, and Total Energies, Ford has been accused of funding climate change denial despite allegedly knowing about the effects of climate change since the 1960s. In 1956, Canadian physicist Gilbert Norman Glass joined the Aeronautics division of Ford, based in Newport Beach, California, which focused on aerospace and defense issues.
Before arriving at Ford, Glass had published a series of pieces on the climate, including a 1956 article in the magazine American Scientist titled Carbon Dioxide and Climate Change, and the 1956 paper in the journal Tellus titled The Carbon Dioxide Theory of Climate Change.
Both pieces made the claim that humanity was responsible for heating the Earth since the 1900s by burning fossil fuels and pumping massive quantities of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.
He continued to study carbon dioxide at Ford, using the company's computers to run early climate models, and published his findings in peer-reviewed scientific journals.
In 1960, Glass became manager of the research lab in the theoretical physics department of Ford. After the Aeronautics division of Ford was merged with Philco and rebranded as Philco Ford, a researcher at the new company named Darrell Eugene Birch continued to examine the issue, co-authoring a series of 1967 scientific reports on carbon dioxide absorption in the atmosphere.
It's unclear whether Birch or Glass shared their findings with top executives at Ford.
In 1989, Ford joined the Global Climate Coalition, which opposed efforts to reduce greenhouse emissions during the George H.W. Bush administration.
It became the first American company to withdraw from the lobbying group in 1999.
Ford also made donations to think tanks that disputed the scientific consensus on climate change between 1985 and 1997. In September 1971, the Ford Motor Company launched the subcompact Pinto for the North American market.
The car's fuel tank integrity is alleged to have been substandard for the time, making the car inordinately susceptible to fuel tank ruptures in rear impact collisions.
An article published in Mother Jones contributed to a public controversy by saying that Ford knowingly released a design that would result in hundreds of deaths as well as calculating that it was cheaper to fight injury claims in court than make changes to the Pinto's fuel system.
Public outcry related to the controversy in the Mother Jones article created political pressure on the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, which initiated an investigation.
The result of the investigation was the issuing a determination that the Pinto and related Mercury Bobcat were defective.
This resulted in Ford recalling 1.5 million Pintos and Bobcats, the largest automotive recall to date.
Two notable legal cases, Grimshaw v. Ford Motor Company and State of Indiana v. Ford Motor Company, are the result of accident-related fuel system fires.
The Grimshaw jury awarded the plaintiffs $127 million, the largest product liability and negligence award in history at that time. The trial judge reduced the jury award to $3.5 million.
Indiana v. Ford was the first time a corporation indicted on criminal charges for a defective product, the Ford Pinto, and the first corporation charged with reckless homicide.
The case resulted in a not guilty verdict.
Subsequent research has discredited early fatality figures and indicate the Pinto's overall fire safety record was typical for subcompacts of the time. In 2002, Ford, along with other multinational corporations, was sued by a group of South Africans represented by the Kulamani Support Group.
Whoa!
The plaintiffs alleged that the company provided vehicles to the South African security forces during the apartheid.
The lawsuit was dismissed in 2014 because the company could not be held liable for the actions of its South African subsidiary. We will continue about Ford in part 2, so stay tuned.